Go.
Okay. I'd like to thank everybody for attending Horror Realm 2011. Today's panel features Clyde Wolfe, Panel-Lowther, Stavros. Clyde, I'd like you to take a few minutes, read an excerpt from your book.
Okay. Let's start with the new guy.
My Schwartz is bigger than yours.
All right. This is one of the short stories in my anthology, Down Darkened Paths. It's called It'll Go Bad Fast. Alan stepped into the kitchen and flicked on the lights. The bright fluorescent glow revealed an unwelcome sight. Centered atop the round table on a yellow platter, staring up with sightless eyes, was a human head. Hairless, the decapitated head sat upright on the truncated stump of its neck, lying amid a congealed pool of its own sluggish blood. It was relatively fresh, the stench of rot not yet in evidence, though a single fly rummaged about an empty socket. The toothless jaws were agape, the grayish tongue protruding slack like a freeze-frame photo of a panting dog. Icy fear raced through Alan's veins. Backing up against the wall, he looked around the kitchen wildly. All the windows appeared locked, all the shades drawn to the sills, and the back door firmly bolted shut. No immediate threats. Just to be sure, Alan checked each hasp. There were no shadowed lurkers hiding in the yard, waiting to pounce when he pulled back a drape and peeked outside. So much for a calm, relaxing Saturday morning. Work had been fraught with myriad tensions and unresolved logistical issues. There was talk of layoffs and restructuring. Of course, this made the workers glare at the foreman with such venom and accusation, as if the fault were his. Alan had looked to the weekend as a chance to unwind and temporarily unshoulder the mountain of burdens thrust his way by upper management, and forget about the plant. This was the last thing he needed. Kelly, come in here. Soft footfalls of slippered feet heralded the arrival of Alan's wife. What is it, dear? I was just... Kelly's breath caught in her throat. A delicate hand covered the formed O of her pert lips. As her husband of these last 8 years had done, her eyes swept the kitchen for signs of danger. Alan, Kelly spun on her heel and started for the stairs. Danny, get down here right now. Yeah, Mom? Alan rushed to Kelly's side. Now, Danny, right now. They hurried to the foot of the carpeted steps, waiting for their son, Daniel Michael Robbins, to appear. Danny appeared, little 4-year-old hands brushing away the last vestiges of crusty sleep. As Danny descended within arm's length, Kelly reached for her only child and gathered him up in her frantic embrace. Alan gave the living room and foyer a once-over. Here, too, doors and windows were shut and shuttered. As a family, they entered the kitchen with the waiting head. When Danny's gaze reached the gaping eye holes, he flipped around in his mother's embrace and hugged tightly, burying his head in the soft white cotton of her robe. Alan shared a look with his wife. He knelt down beside the boy and gently peeled him away from Kelly. Danny, Alan stroked his son's wispy black hair. Danny, did you wake up in the middle of the night again? A tiny nod. Were you a little hungry? Again, the fractional bob of the head. Alan turned his son from the corpse gaze, so Danny was facing him directly. Danny, what have we told you about leaving food on the table overnight? Sniffling, Danny replied, always put it back in the refrigerator. Right, and why? Another sniffle. Because it'll go bad fast. And if the neighbors see, they'll be upset and call the bad people to come and take us all away. Tears glistened on his ruddy 4-year-old cheeks. Danny wiped them away with a thin trickle of snot, a new layer added to the oft-used pajama sleeve. Kelly bent down and draped a comforting, motherly arm around her son's little shoulders. As a family, they all considered the gradually spoiling head. Honey, she said, it's very important to remember. The neighbors may be nice people, but they're very nosy and would not understand, especially Mrs. Jacobs next door. So we all have to be very careful, even Mommy and Daddy. I'm sorry, Danny pouted. I'll be careful. Promise? Danny nodded vigorously. Good. Now go watch some cartoons. Alan gave his son a reassuring hug. Kelly added, we love you very, very much, Danny. Gone were the sniffles and the pouting lip, replaced now by the bright, beaming smile of a child anticipating the Saturday antics of his favorite superheroes. The last tears were drying, leaving behind salty trails down Danny's cheeks. Alan and Kelly marveled at their son's resilience. With a dash, Danny was bounding up the stairs to his room. The sounds of cartoonish mayhem and a child's innocent delight followed. Alan lifted the plate with one hand while prodding the head sagging cheeks with the other. Well, he already ate the best parts, and it's been sitting out all night. He headed for the wastebasket. Kelly's restraining hand kept him from dumping the meat. Wait, dear. Alan held the plate steady as Kelly poked and prodded with a critical eye. It's not too far gone. I can make a casserole for lunch. Alan set the head on the countertop. He kissed Kelly, warmly hugging her womanly form to him. With a smile, he said, "That's why I married you."
Yeah.
That's good. That is great.
Eric, do you want to start?
This is from my new novel, Area 187 Almost Hell, Chapter 1. Welcome to the morning show, Professor Dowling, Josephine Terrell said to her guest, her plastic smile fixed to her face. A pleasure as always, Miss Terrell, the ancient scholar said, returning her smile with a reserved grin. So tell me, Professor, you believe there's no truth to the rumors of survivors in Area 187? Josephine asked. You mean currently? He said, stroking his close-cropped graying beard subconsciously. There are always exceptions to the rule, of course, but on any kind of measurable scale, I would have to answer no. Homeland Security sweeps the entire area regularly with heat-sensing equipment that can spot a rabbit from 500 feet up. And while Area 187 does boast populations of fauna that have learned to deal with their new predators, no trace of human survivors has been found. What about grave robbers? Shouldn't those sweeps catch them as well? Josephine asked. She leaned forward slightly in the time-honored pose of television journalist interest. The studio lights seemed more intense than usual this morning, adding to her headache. Grave robbers are a different matter entirely. These are outlaws, Miss Terrell. Outlaws don't want to be found. I can only assume that if there were survivors in Area 187, they would have had a decidedly different outlook on being discovered. So you don't believe the theory that the government doesn't want survivors found? Josephine asked. That is nothing more than conspiracy theorists bored with the grassy knoll, Miss Terrell. Dowling answered. The smile on his face had bordered on the patronizing. This isn't China. This is America. America doesn't sacrifice its people for the sake of quiet in this country. If it did, those in your profession would seize it like the latest Pop-Tart scandal. Josephine could sense her subject drawing away from her. She should have expected that from her line of questioning. This was supposed to be a piece about new advances in the science of the undead, not a study of Area 187 policy and rumor. She took a deep modulated breath and hoped the cameras wouldn't notice when she mentally shifted gears. Have any new developments come through on the scientific front concerning the necrotic infection? Dowling smiled at her slightly, sensing her shift back to the advertised reason for the interview. There are scores of scientists and researchers working on it, of course. You must understand, little is known about the virus. Unlike cancer, necrotic infection in this form has been around for less than a decade. A cure is nothing more than a science fiction pipe dream, since the brain is just damaged beyond repair from lack of blood and oxygen shortly after the virus takes control. Even if the effects be reversed, the mind would never revive and the cells of the body would be changed too drastically to ever declare a victim cured. The best tactic is the one most heavily researched and tested, the vaccine. Those that have been infected are lost, Ms. Terrell. The key now is to develop a vaccine that will ensure the virus never spreads. Such a vaccine is years away, if it comes at all. Now, I understand there have been limited trials of a type of poison bait dropped into the area. What are they dropping and how are they hoping to do? Josephine asked. Dowling's mouth hung open for a moment before he cleared his throat, then sipped at the steaming cup on the table beside him. I wasn't aware of such testing, but I can tell you that an article in a recent medical digest spoke of developing an antivirus. To my knowledge, such a program is only a theoretical stage. So how would an antivirus work? I have no involvement in those or any other programs. I wouldn't want to step on the toes of my colleagues in the research profession by speaking out of turn. As for any sort of tainted bait, the undead will consume any sort of fresh meat they find. Studies have shown the virus feeds on the raw proteins found in fresh meat and blood, absorbing it through the stomach lining. The body of an undead doesn't pump blood. This is also why a previously dead body can't be reanimated. The virus relies on the living circulatory system to spread throughout the body to a degree where it then causes what we call death. Well, if that's the case, Professor, then how does the virus benefit from consuming protein in the first place? With no circulatory system, how does the virus enter the body or other parts not in contact with the stomach receive the proteins? Like the beginning of the sequel, she was covering old information now, information that most everyone knew about the virus and the dead. But just like those sequels, some audiences often need a reminding of what they already knew. The virus operates like a cancer in a way. Over the course of time, the virus metastasizes to form literal chains of cells that eventually create a network throughout the infected body. Proteins from the stomach are transferred along this network, feeding it. If such an antivirus program exists, theoretically the antivirus would travel along this network in the same manner as the other proteins. Josephine could tell he was as bored with the question as she, but Mr. and Mrs. America had to have something to go with the bacon and eggs. Well, what about waste products? How does the body of an undead eliminate them without what we would call a working digestive system? Dowling frowned back at her. They were moving away from his reason for being on the program, plugging his new book, of course. He sighed softly and answered her anyway. Undead are like dogs and will eat anything so long as there's food to be had, even after their stomachs rupture. Some waste can be excreted from the bowels, but this is entirely only due to movement and gravity since they no longer have autonomic control. Specimens have been found with bloated midsections where so much has been consumed that the stomach tears, introducing the overflow into the reanimate's body cavity. Still others have been found with food clogging their esophagi all the way up to their mouths. Though really, Ms. Terrell, I find it hard to believe your viewers see this as a proper breakfast topic. That was it. Josephine could feel the professor shutting down on her, his folded arms blocking her from any real discourse. Have there been any other breakthroughs or advances in the field, she asked. Generic questions in his book would be the only way to fill up the segment now. There's been some discussion about protein inhibitors or the introduction of necrotic bacteria to the area. As we've already discussed, the infected are not completely dead as in the sense of Hollywood cinema. The protein takes on sole food for the body and the virus, creating a circle of life within the infected body. It must consume protein to survive, and its only reason for survival is to consume protein. The infected body becomes nothing more than a machine with only one function. Again, theoretically, if protein inhibitors in sufficient quantities could be introduced, they could, in effect, starve the undead body. And what happens when the infected body is denied protein? Well, eventually it will die. However, that death will come at an exceptionally slow rate. Research has shown that an infected body denied protein from the outside sources will absorb it from the body itself. Muscles, organs, and other tissues that contain protein are absorbed into the body to provide virus with fuel. This occurs at a very slow rate and has been proven that the virus can be rather selective about what tissues the body consumes first when no new proteins are introduced. Organs it no longer has use for, such as the heart, liver, and circulatory and waste processing organs, are usually consumed first. The virus, in a sense, knows it needs to keep the body mobile to seek out protein, so it leaves the major muscle groups and skin as its last resort, providing just enough energy to keep the body mobile for as long as possible, which slows its decomposition. While protein inhibitors may work, the challenge would be introducing enough of them into the body, and even then it would be far from an instant solution since the virus can cannibalize from its own host for a long period of time. And is there any truth to these rumors that these infected prefer human flesh to other meat? Josephine asked. She had ventured fully into the common script now, with every question asked and answered by talking heads and academics thousands of times. I don't believe it to be a preference based on the meat itself. I've always contended since the first experiments into your question that human meat is not necessarily preferred by an infected body. Rather, it's far easier to catch and consume. We are not particularly fast when compared to practically every other animal on the planet, and we lack the thick hides and natural weapons of these lesser animals. The sight of an infected person shambling towards us would usually fill us with so much fear that we freeze to the spot or hide in irrational or easily discovered places. Humans have occupied the top of the spot on the food chain for thousands of years. In that time, we have lost many of the traits of other mammals. We're incredibly loud and depend on our sight far too much to make fleet prey. The virus uses all senses of the human body equally, much in the same manner as a blind man unconsciously develops his hearing and sense of smell to compensate for the loss of sight. In a fight or flight situation, the human animal breathes noisily, steps heavily, and often vocalizes. These sound cues, along with scent in some cases, can attract many infected at one time, leading to the classic swarm attacks made so famous in cinema and in footage from the early days of containment of Area 187. I see, Josephine said. So in your new book, The Blind Dead, Josephine held up a copy with a thick book for the camera, its cover filled with silhouettes better suited to a video rental package than an academic text. You discussed the effectiveness of the various methods used in Area 187's buffer zone to keep the infected from massing against the physical barriers. Why do they shy away from the bright light and stay out of daylight? Do they fear light? Josephine couldn't help feeling like one of the middle-aged models that displayed the fine wares on The Price is Right. To say they fear anything is a dangerous oversimplification. They don't have the capacity to experience emotions of any sort or kind. Their aversion to strong light is a direct result of the physical damage and deterioration that occurs to their eyes over the course of time, and the fact their eyes don't dilate like they did in life. They produce no tears to cleanse the eyes and don't blink involuntarily as we do. The blemishes developed act as much as a chip in a pair of sunglasses or a crack in a windshield, reflecting the light wildly within the eye and causing a sort of sensory overload to occur. Dowling smiled now that he was finally able to hype his book. So bright lights cause pain, Josephine asked. Not according to our research. Their nervous systems in regards to physical sensation are, for all practical concerns, dead. Instead, my research indicates intense light can overwhelm them to the point that other senses are ignored and they will shy away from it. However, light will not dissuade them from hunting. The need to consume is their one goal. Short bursts of intense light can stun them in a fashion for a moment or two, but if their other senses tell them that prey is near, they'll continue to seek it. Josephine put on her fake smile again. Is it true the buffer zone can now be seen from space? A little trivia always goes over well with Mr. and Mrs. America's Morning Cup. Only at night, Dowling said, still smiling. The buffer zone is a mile deep in Area 187 in most places. Considering the massive size, it only stands to reason that a mile-thick ring lit up at night in low weather conditions by the brightest and most intense artificial light yet developed could be seen from orbit. By keeping industrial and other sudden noticeable sounds away from the buffer zone on our side, and keeping the area bathed in natural and artificial light on theirs, we've had almost no incidences of swarming against the walls and barriers of Area 187. If there's nothing to attract them to enter the light, they typically won't. The human eye is very delicate, Ms. Terrell. As such, it's often the first sense to suffer when a body reanimates. The other senses of the human body have more physical protection, are typically made from stronger stuff, and thus are the last to succumb to the time of deterioration.
Just 1 moment.
You say there's side. How long will we have to wait before reclaiming Area 187? How do we combat it? How do we reclaim the land? We don't. Our current policy of containment has worked flawlessly. So long as we as a people and our government continue the practice and bide our time, we will win.
Thank you. Very good. Finally, Stavros, what are you going to be reading from?
I'm going to be reading from Blood Junkie. A little bit of setup, I guess, since this is started in the fourth quarter. My characters, Lynette Pevensey, has moved to Sao Paulo, Brazil with the vampire Dominique DePaul, and she's there with her maid, Roland Davenport, and Lynette's son has recently been born. They haven't been taken kindly to the community. They've already been attacked once, and what I'm going to read for you is the second attack. And this bit of story takes place in 1776, Sao Paulo, Brazil.